Hey guys, I'm Youngbuck, I'm the head coach of XL Esports, and today I'm going to run you through the key points of the 11.9 patch so that you have an advantage before the patch even goes live. So here you can see the overview. There's a lot of champion nerfs and buffs, a few small ones, but also really a few big ones. Namely, I think Hecarim will have we'll see a lot less play, and Kog'Maw Lulu might be terrifying in solo queue once again. And we also see really big changes on That Man's Plate, which can really shake up the jungle meta for both solo queue and for competitive. But I'm also going to run you through the smaller nerfs and buffs. Diana's changes don't seem to impact solo queue too much compared to competitive. Usually losing some armor growth or base armor really hurts jungling. This is a very minor nerf, so I don't think we'll see her fall out of flavor just yet. I think her pick rate and win rate will slightly decrease, but not too much. Dr. Mundo is one of those champions with very high base stats, but very little CC. So he's used very often as a pick into a lot of magic damage, but I think with this meta and with the items that we have right now, there's so much anti-healing that a small nerf can be a big nerf. And we see that as well, like his matchups into AD champions are getting punished more, so he's really going to be more of a niche pick into a lot of magic damage heavy. Let's say you play against an Ornn with a Nidalee jungle, then you might still see Dr. Mundo do really well. Other than that, probably won't see him as much. Yeah, I don't see much to change with Garen. It's a very unique champion. Either you're really good at it, while it has a very low skill cap. But yeah, you might see some people spinning from the bushes, but I don't see a very big change here. Then we go to Gragas. I mean, Gragas has been terror in 3 different positions, not so much in jungle actually recently because of his jungle speed clear. I think the body slam nerf, it's kind of warranted. It has been coming for a while because his base damage is so incredibly high that he's a really good top laner and also a good support. I think we will still see the same amount of Gragas. He just has such a good kit overall, like for multiple positions. He offers so much utility to a team. This champion is not going away very quickly. And then we get to Hecarim. Hecarim is actually receiving massive nerfs, and that's really important. I think Hecarim has been very dominant in the meta for the past few months in both solo queue and in competitive. And now we're seeing nerfs to his base damages, also to itemization that he's using. So he might be forced to build more AD heavy. First of all, we talked earlier, base armor nerf for jungler is massive. It makes it way more difficult to clear the jungle and stay healthy, which means he's way more punishable in his own jungle. So you can counter jungle him more often, which was already the go-to strategy, was to make sure that he was falling behind early on by late invading or just trying to take his camps from him before he hit level 6. We also see pretty big damage nerfs. The Q was what gave him very consistent damage, and you also see a really big nerf to the E, which is something that AD carries will be really happy about because they usually saw a Hecarim E charge into them, take out half the HP, and then also knock them into the enemy team. I think we might even see Hecarim go below 50% win rate, or really fall out of the meta or be more of a counter pick because of this. There's just so many nerfs all at once. And then also the itemization nerfs. He might be forced to go back to Trinity Force or something like Sunfire, a very different itemization. So very big nerf. Expected to see a lot less Hecarim. And we will see more of his counterparts in champions like Volibear. Then we have Heimerdinger. Not much to say. It's a very, very unique champion. He has good win rates, but takes a lot of skill. You don't see him very often. And yeah, everyone knows by now how to counter it. If you're an older player, you just kill the turrets early on. Make sure, especially on level 1, that you can't allow him to have his turrets up. So you'll sometimes in competitive games against a Heimerdinger see 5 people just stacking in the top lane, bot lane, wherever you see the Heimerdinger just to get the towers down. I don't think we'll see much Heimerdinger. It's just a very, very special, unique champion. As for Jinx, this is a very much needed but minor nerf. I think it's a very solid nerf as well. Jinx will definitely stay viable in both solo queue and competitive play, but now it just has a little bit more counterplay, especially mid to late game, where she already has a pretty decent and strong early game because she can push very well with the Q. Now at least her damage is getting hit a little bit in her AoE splash, so we'll still see a lot of Jinx, but she'll just be a little bit less stronger and more healthy for the meta. Then we have Kayn. I'm not sure how much this is going to change for solo queue because I do think that Shadow Assassin is still not going to be the number 1 pick for Kayn. So we'll see more of the Darkin. It's not a big change. I will still say though, Kayn is a strong solo queue pick. It's something you don't see very often in competitive, but if you don't punish it early game with strong jungle mashups and invades, which don't happen as often in solo queue at all levels really, Kayn will become very strong and will be very difficult to deal with. So we'll still see Kayn, and he will probably have a very solid win rate. And it's definitely, if you want to get jungle elo, Kayn is a champion that you want to be playing. Then we have Kindred. Kindred is in a bit of a tough spot. Has a lot of weak matchups in the current jungle meta, and the base damages aren't great either. Itemization isn't very solid either. It's nice to see the buff, but I don't think it will be meta. We won't see it very often, because usually when Kindred is in the meta, you also see champions like Zilean and Lulu in mid lane. They're currently not in the meta either. It's very much focused on control mages, so I don't think there's really a place for Kindred in the meta right now. And then we go to Kog'Maw, also in combination with Lulu. This is, I think, one of the scarier ones, especially if you like dual queuing bot lane. Personally, when I see Lulu Kog'Maw on enemy team and I'm not playing bot lane or whatever role I'm playing, really, I know it's going to be a really tough game because these champions scale so well and work so well off of each other, and they're both getting buffed. So I think especially for dual queue players, Lulu Kog'Maw is going to see some play. I think all you really have to do is ban something like Thresh. Maybe another hook champion if you really want to do it with your dual queue partner. But yeah, Kog'Maw is getting a small buff, more of mana buff. The Q, you don't use it very often, but it might help with shredding tanks later in the game. Laning phase, therefore, is not impacted too much, but the E does help hitting you. It hits some auto attacks and ults. I think the win rate itself won't go up too much, but I just think the combination with Lulu, which we get into now, is a big deal. Lulu's W getting buffed in both cooldown, so early laning phase, and the bonus attack speed. I think that's a pretty big buff. And Lulu's were already putting like 2-3 points into Q and then starting to max W. And I think Kog'Maw is the champion that benefits the most from this. So they're both getting individually buffed, but they also have very synergistic skill sets. So I think we'll see a lot more Lulu Kog'Maw and solo queue together. Then we come to Morgana. We've seen some Morgana here and there, and it's a really nice champion to have in the jungle. It's very similar to a champion like Gragas. It just has a really good skill set for both solo queue and competitive play. A lot of CC, also has a spell shield, so it's a small nerf to the jungle clear, which is quite important in this meta, but I don't think we'll see Morgana completely disappear yet. And I think if you build her a bit tanky and supportive, it will still work really well. I'm thinking something like GLP will really work well with her kit. If you do have a tank top lane, that's where you might want to go into full AP mode. But I'm seeing more of a beefy support Morgana being very strong and just locking down enemies for your teammates. Then we get to Rumble, very minor nerf. I think if you're a one-trick Rumble, especially in mid lane, not much is going to change for you. You're going to push in your wave and roam. That's still Rumble's job. It's always been his job to really control the early game. And we've seen a move from top lane to mid lane. Makes a lot of sense because you cannot really control the game very well from top lane. So mid lane Rumble. If you just want to win the early game, push in and try to impact other roles, it's still a great champion to have in your arsenal. So not a big nerf. We'll still see some Rumble. Then we see a Sett buff. I think this one is pretty nasty because Sett is one of the champions that's one of the highest base damages in the game, especially as a top laner. And even more so is that he has very few bad matchups. Like you have to pick something ranged into him to even think about beating him. So I always hate playing against it, and I play top laner solo queue, and I just see these buffs. I don't like it because I have to play against it. If you are a top laner, you may definitely want to give Sett a go because seeing more buffs to a champion that already has really good base damages and does have a really solid kit overall, it's a scary champion. Shen gets a small nerf. I think this has more impact on competitive play than on solo queue. And Shen, generally speaking, is more of a competitive champion because you want to pair him with strong champions. And one of those is Hecarim, which we saw being nerfed. So if you do see less Hecarim in your solo queue, which you definitely will, she will also probably see less Shen. It's also really good to pair with something like LeBlanc, champions like Kai'Sa, which are still in the meta. But Shen is a champion you want to pick. You kind of want to blind pick it, but later in the draft because you need to see what your teammates are picking. So It's not a very strong solo queue pick. It's definitely playable. And I would say if you want to become a pro player, Shen is a champion you have to be able to play because it will be met at some point due to how strong its kit is. So it's a small nerf. I don't think it will impact solo queue very much. But if you want to become a professional player, definitely pick up Shen. You will need it at some point. Then we see a small Taric buff. I like this quite a lot because I just like the champion and the kit that it provides. Now, generally in this meta, a lot of engage comes from support. It's usually support and jungle that have to engage in this meta. And Taric doesn't really offer that. So that's why we haven't been seeing much Taric. But I think there is a spot for him in the meta when you are laning against something like Alistar. I think Taric is a really good pick. But make sure that you see someone in your team with an engage. Something that you can follow up on. So usually it has been really strong with a champion like Jarvan. But in this meta, you would be looking at something like Hecarim, which again got nerfed. So there's still Volibear out there. It might work okay with Udyr, which is also getting an indirect nerf. But you definitely want to play this champion into something like some melee matchups that can be played into Braum, can be played into Alistar. But try to make it a counter pick, and it's very situational because you do need some engage elsewhere in your team. Otherwise, your team is going to lack the engage because that's what the other supports are providing. Then we see Trundle. I think Trundle is an interesting champion. We also practice it in our scrims because we actually thought it had really good matchups into Udyr in particular, but also has an okay matchup into Hecarim. Hecarim is just a bit of a better champion. Combining this with a Sunfire buff, we might see some Trundle, especially being played more into Udyr. It's an okay champion. It will stay in the jungle. I don't really see it much as a top lane or a support right now because it doesn't offer too much wave clear in top lane, and in support there's just many better champions with better kits. So we might see some Trundle if Udyr becomes a staple in the meta, but I have my doubts on that. So it will just be a counter pick in a scenario where we find ourselves in the Zac Sejuani meta. Then we go to Vladamir. I'm a big fan of Vladamir because it's a champion that if you have in your arsenal, it can win you games. It's mainly aimed at top lane. I don't think it has much of a space in the mid lane right now because it's just going to lose and get out of range by champions like Orianna, Xerath that we see on the screen as well. A lot of control mages just win the lane against him and scale very evenly. But this is a champion that you want to have in your arsenal if your opponents lock in something like a Gangplank or even a Shen, an Ornn. You can just pick the Vladamir and tell your team, listen guys, I don't need any help from you. Just let me scale, isolate my lane. So if you don't play Vladamir yet and you are missing some AP champions in your champion pool, I would say ignore the nerf and pick up the champion and play it a bit because it especially want to become a pro player. I think this is one of the best counter picks in the game because when you pick it, it usually is a game-winning pick. Then we see Xerath. Some minor buffs to the mid lane and some small nerfs to support. Makes sense. Xerath was not made to be a support. It was made to be a very long-range champion. Now, I actually mained Xerath for a long time when I was playing mid lane, and I really like the champion. I think it's a good champion for solo queue, not for competitive play, because it's really easy to engage on him. And I think it's a champion that I think a lot of mid laners could experiment with it just for solo queue elo, really, not really for competitive play, but picking it a little bit later in the draft when you see that the opponents don't have much engage. I think that's where Xerath shines because Xerath actually has a very decent matchup into champions like Orianna, and Orianna is probably the most picked champion right now. It's also very decent into Syndra. It's good into Azir. A lot of the control mages are actually countered by Xerath because of how much range he has, and he still has really solid wave clear. So for solo queue elo, I can recommend you to try Xerath, especially I think in the lower brackets. I was using it in Platinum and lower Diamond. I'm not a good mid laner, but the champion is quite forgiving, so I would definitely pick up Xerath as a mid laner if I just wanted some elo. Okay, then we hit the item section. We see a nerf to Deadman's Plate, which was built often on the beefy junglers, which are already seeing some nerfs, and we're also going over another big nerf with a triple Chemtank. I think overall, this will really hurt Hecarim, it will hurt Udyr, it will hurt Volibear. So these champions might have a little bit less win rate. I think Volibear comes out as a bit of a winner here because he's least affected by these changes, or at least gets the least nerfs, because Hecarim is also receiving a lot of other nerfs. We might see a lot of these champions go for different build paths, or even see some champions like, I think Hecarim has to go a different build path. Udyr, you might even see fall out of the meta in combination with the Chemtank nerfs, because it is pretty big and he needs items to really stick onto its opponent. So we might see more AD heavy build on Hecarim. We might see a lot less Udyr, or probably will, and Volibear will also probably change up his itemization to maybe a Death Dance or a Starix Engage. But yeah, that's my play. The nerf is pretty big, but mainly in combination with the other items being nerfed and the other change to jungle. Then we hit Death Dance. I don't have too much to say about this. It's a nice little buff. I think the champions that are abusing it, and I'm mainly looking at something like Aatrox, isn't very much in the meta. It's a bit of a counter pick. Gangplank was using it a bit last season. I don't see this working on Gangplank either. I just think that with the changes it made to being only for physical damage, it is a very niche item, and the right champions need to be in the meta, and they're currently not. Death Dance is a nice nerf buff, but I don't think we'll see it very often. Then we have the Moonstone Renewer buff. That probably means we'll see more Moonstaff. It might mean we see more Seraphine again, which is quite scary. It's a buff to Karma as well, which is not a very popular pick in competitive play, but it's a champion that I really love in solo queue, especially if you haven't played for a while and you're a solo laner or a support. Just lock in Karma and throw your spells and just get basically your mechanics back in the game. But I think this will just make Seraphine stronger. We'll just have to see how other champions affect something like a Seraphine mid lane, because he was working really well off of Olaf, off of Hecarim, and they're gonna fall out of flavor. Udyr will fall out of favor as well, so maybe still combined with the Volibear, but we'll have to see really also how other roles are impacted, because otherwise we might see Seraphine as only a support, because it needs a good jungle champion to work with. Then we see the Prowler's Claw. I actually think I saw some uproar on Twitter, but for me it's like a similar change as to the Ignite changes many years ago, where you could actually ignite minions. And yeah, it's maybe a little bit of skill expression, but really this is one of those things like just you know it's supposed to hit the enemy. If you accidentally click on a minion or there's some overlap, let's be a little bit forgiving there. All in all, Prowler's Claw is a champion that I think you really want to build on Rek'Sai, and Rek'Sai might see some more play now with all the other jungle nerfs. I would say if you're a jungler, try Prowler's Claw Rek'Sai. It's actually pretty nasty. Then Sunfire. A lot of the changes in itemization in Sunfire and Turbo Chemtank. I mean, there's some nerfs in Turbo. I'm actually going to go over them at the same time because I think they affect each other. We see a nerf in the Turbo Chemtank, which is going to really impact a champion like Udyr, who needs movement speed to engage on his champions. Whereas something like Hecarim might just go for a different build, might go Trinity Force, Divine Sunderer, might go Sunfire Aegis. But what this also does, the Sunfire buff, is it might bring back champions like a Sejuani or a Zac. But I'm mainly going to look at something like Sejuani, because if Volibear is going to be now the jungle king, which it might very well be, and this item is getting a buff, it means that there is space for Sejuani in the meta. Now, I would say as a solo queue player, I would say wait a bit, because Sejuani is more of a competitive champion. But if you're in the higher elo brackets, you might want to give Sejuani a go. Other than that, Volibear is probably going to rule the jungle for now. And some of the champions have to go into a Sunfire build. Like I don't see, like Udyr has built Sunfire in the past. It just doesn't feel as good. So we might see Sunfire Udyrs, but the win rate will definitely tank a bit, but worth still experimenting with. Then last but not least, we have a Wit's End buff. I think it's actually a pretty big buff, because the weakness of its item was that it's very attack speed focused, and a lot of the champions in the game just don't work that well off of attack speed, or they benefit more from attack damage than attack speed. So I think it was a very unique item for something like Irelia that was actually working quite well with it. Sometimes you saw a champion like Lucian pick it up in the mid lane if it was playing against a mage in mid lane and something like a Nidalee, a magic damage dealing champion in the jungle. But most champions want attack damage over the attack speed on Wit's End, because it's mainly a bruiser item. So this is a nice buff. I don't think we'll see it very often still. And I don't see, for example, a Camille saying, well, now I want Wit's End. So it's a small buff to champions like Irelia. Well, really mainly Irelia is the one that comes to mind, because it's a champion that works really well off of the attack speed and likes the attack damage as well. So it's a good buff. We'll see it more often, and definitely will make enemies more worried, especially in competitive play, to pick double magic damage stacking jungle, mid lane, jungle, top lane combinations. So yeah, all in all, really small, nice buff, and that rounds it up for today. To sum it up for solo queue, I think if you were playing Hecarim, you might want to drop it and give Volibear a try. I think Volibear will be the king in the jungle. He's the least affected by the item changes. Didn't get any number nerfs either. So Udyr got pretty bigly impacted by the nerfs on the itemizations. Volibear is very versatile. He's the jungler you probably want to pick up on this patch and will also see in competitive play. Kog'Maw Lulu combination for duo queue players is going to be very strong in solo queue. It already was. It's even stronger. Just a really good combination. I don't think this will affect MSI or competitive play too much because teams just prefer having Engage on support, which in solo queue isn't as important. So it won't affect competitive play much, but for solo queue, Kog'Maw Lulu is terrifying because it requires a lot of coordination to play against it. We might see no Shen at MSI, sadly, but for solo queue, and especially if you do have aspirations and ambition to become a pro player, pick it up because you will need it at some point in the meta, and there might be some situation in which you really want to play it. Other than that, I think a lot of minor changes, minor buffs, nerfs, which are very welcome. And the biggest thing we'll have to look out for at MSI is the changes to the jungle itemization, how it's going to impact the meta. Hecarim will probably be completely out of flavor, so the meta will be built around Volibear probably being like a first pick or like being the top tier jungle pick. So we might see some more Sejuani with the Sunfire buff. I don't know what other champions are that strong into Volibear, quite frankly. It's like one of the beefiest, strongest brawlers. So we might just see people trying to go for a little bit more of a scaling champion against it and just giving up the early game. And that might be the same for solo queue. Like Volibear is the pick to go for if you're a jungler. So I hope that sums it up well and gives you good advantage going into solo queue today and next week. Thank you for watching this patch note presentation. I hope you've liked it, and I also hope you liked this video. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And what I would really love to see in the comments is what you are going to do with this patch, what you're going to pick up or drop, but also what you want to see in the patch notes in the coming 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks we'll be back again with another presentation when the new patch comes live.